As a Punjabi therapist for the past 5 years, there's some common themes and patterns that have maybe come across with my clientele from the South Asian population. Now, today I'm going to talk about some of the top 5, let's say, toxic things that we experience from our parents. And this video is not for the purpose of chastising, villainizing, or getting out our pitchforks and being mad at our families or our parents, because most of the time people can do the best they can with the information they have. Meaning, if our parents knew better, they could do better. But here we are, the next generation, with an ample opportunity to do differently than our parents did, and that sometimes means reflecting on some of the hurts that they may have inadvertently caused us. So let's get into it. Here's a list of some of the common things that bring somebody into a therapist's office. Experiencing guilt tripping, having experienced silent treatment or stonewalling as it's sometimes called, being invalidated or having your feelings dismissed or gaslit. Also, a parent's entitlement or kind of ownership over your life trajectory, your emotions, your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Now, this sounds pretty intense and it can be overwhelming. So, of course, if you haven't had therapy before, but it's something you're considering doing, feel free to email me at contact@therapycovecounseling.com. We can see if we'd be a good therapeutic fit, or I can guide you in the right direction if you're looking for something different. So, number one, if you've experienced a childhood where you were constantly being made to feel guilty just for having your own thoughts, opinions, feelings, or desires, then later on in life, this can lead to a lot of people-pleasing tendencies. This can mean you have a hard time saying no. This can mean you base your self-worth and identity upon how other people receive you and feel about you. And essentially, our parents did this because usually the flip side to the coin is a lot of fear and just a lack of know-how as to any other way to motivate or get their child to do what they felt was best. Because they were navigating a whole new different land, literally in a new environment as an immigrant, it can be a really scary experience. There's a lot of unknown and unvariables. And based on how human nature and we are kind of wired, whenever there's uncertainty, we kind of double down on our control. And one of the biggest ways to elicit control is to invoke the human emotion of guilt. So perhaps this control tactic by using guilt was really a byproduct to the amount of fear and cortisol coursing through their veins as they were navigating a whole new landscape and different environment and trying to make a home and establish themselves and get some footing in a foreign land that had new cuisine, new dress, new language. Everything was just very overstimulating and flooding to their nervous system. Thus, that's what they had to give you. Next up, the wonderful land of silent treatment and stonewalling. Let's say you did not submit to their guilt-inducing tactics and you did in fact take a stand and you put your foot down and you said no means no and you had your boundaries. Well, most likely you were met with the silent treatment, meaning they would stop talking to you, maybe even act like you didn't exist. They would really make you feel diminished and small, and it is such a deep-seated wound when we have had these very vulnerable, painful experiences as a small child. Now, when we're reflecting on them as adults, it can be comical. You could say, oh my goodness, my mom or my dad resorted to silent treatment because they didn't have any other tools in their toolbox. They really felt so powerless that they felt like revoking their voice and their attention was the only way they could gain some control over a seemingly uncontrollable situation. Now, most of the time we experience these types of things like silent treatment in adolescence. Now, naturally, adolescence is a very change-fueled time. We're biologically wired during the teenage years to go against our parents and our families, and this has a primitive link to it because let's say what the research shows in, for example, penguins, is they go away from their home clan to go mate with other penguins or groups and families of penguins to avoid inbreeding. So here we can say there's a biological kind of switch that goes off, that we try to go against our innate family, our natural immediate family, and we ascribe more to the thoughts, feelings, and opinions of our peers because peer validation becomes more valuable in our eyes, all for the purpose of, yes, it comes down to mating and furthering the generation and That's just basically how we're wired. And a lot of our intuitive inner driving forces are revolved around that procreation. So, if we have endured the wound of silent treatment in our youth, in our adolescence, then we may have trouble speaking our mind and using our voice later on in adulthood, or it can be the other way around. We have an overcompensation and we might have issues with self regulation, emotional regulation, where there's a lot of big outbursts because we are reminded anytime somebody makes us feel invalidated or small or ignored, which is the root wound of silent treatment. And so we have a big response to that with maybe yelling or screaming or shouting. And then it can also go the other way where we become muted and we feel like it's futile to use our voice because we're just going to be ignored and unaddressed anyway. So if you notice these patterns, again, this is something really handy to get counseling therapy for, because none of this is set in stone. It's absolutely malleable and it is possible to change these things. Next up, how many times have we heard those dismissive statements like "Chal koi nahi, roida nahi hunda, apna man hor paase la," or "Eh kedi inni baddi gal si, tu aimi tappi janni or tappi janna ya," right? Really invalidating, gaslighting language. Now, their formula for survival has been to repress. So they don't have any tools or resources at how to deal with tears, how to deal with sadness or anger. So they go by the whole "see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil" kind of formula. So they're just giving you the formula that has worked for them, because there was no landscape or luxury of emotional upbringing or tolerance development or any coping strategy development for that matter. So when they're using these terms, in their mind, they think they're giving you a recipe for success and this is how you fare well in the world. Don't cry, be very strong. However, the avoidance of vulnerability is actually weaker than the ability to sit with our vulnerability. So when they're teaching us an old formula that might have worked in a different time, now we do have the luxury to express our emotions, interact with vulnerability. And what is crying? It's essentially just fluid leaving our body, just as sweat leaves our body when we exercise really hard or when we're feeling hot. So it's got a negative connotation to it, especially in the Punjabi culture. However, in a sense, our avoidance of vulnerability is what's hindering our progress as a cultural group. And this is something to think about as well in terms of, let's say, one day when you do parent, it's really important to encourage emotional releases and expression so that we're not shaming or guilt tripping our children when they do have an emotional release. A lot of that comes from our experience as children. And if those inner child wounds of hearing that kind of dismissive language from our parents is still hanging out, then we might accidentally perpetuate this pattern. Last but not least, if your parents view you as an extension of themselves and they feel really entitled or almost justified in manhandling the different aspects of your life, perhaps that's because their whole life has been about servitude, giving to others, making a life for their children, serving their spouse and trying to make their life better, then serving their aging parents and trying to make their lives better. Therefore, they have no concept of individuality. So when they're trying to maybe guide you or coach you in an overbearing manner, in a controlling manner, it's simply because they're products of their environment and we are creatures of habit. So they're just passing on what's generationally occurred. Their parents gave them a little bit of controlling behavior and manhandled their lives. Therefore, they're trying to do that to their offspring because they think that's just the way life goes. However, this can feel like a boundary violation to us where we're not accustomed to this. We want to have our own dreams, aspirations, and way to go about life. So it's really important to kind of find that fine balance of using assertive language and maybe using a lot of I statements and letting them know, like, I want to go about things this manner. I will find more fulfillment in this career. And if they view that as a huge disobedience or kind of betrayal that really strikes them, then perhaps that means it's high time for them to find their own luxuries, hobbies, interests, passions, and pursuit of happiness with a different formula. And even if it feels like it's creating a lot of waves when you're saying no and you're pushing back and you're holding boundaries in a respectful manner, at least it might be planting the seeds for our parents to go on and find their own happiness instead of living through their children. That was a mouthful, but I hope that you enjoyed this informative video. This is not a replacement for therapy, so please do reach out if any of this rung true to you or created a little bit of activation inside. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.